the whistle of the eastbound train cut through the late afternoon air like a blade, sharp and final, and Clara Whitmore stood on the wooden platform with her small leather suitcase clenched in both hands, her gloves damp with sweat despite the chill wind rolling down from the mountains, her heart pounding not with excitement but with exhaustion, the kind that comes from years of disappointment layered one on top of another. And she told herself again that leaving was the right thing, that the West had taken enough from her already. Her father's life, her youth, her last illusions about freedom and fairness. And now it was time to go back east, where things were orderly, predictable, safe, even if they were dull and lonely. Because lonely was something she understood. But then boots hit the boards behind her. Heavy, fast, urgent, and before she could turn, a voice, low, steady, roughened by dust and sun, said her name like it mattered, like it carried weight in the world. And when she turned, she saw him. Jacob Hale standing there, with his hat in his hand and his chest rising like he'd ridden hard to get here, his coat still carrying the smell of horse and leather and sweat, his eyes locked on hers, as if the entire town had fallen away. And there was only this moment, and he said, "Don't get on that train," not loud, not pleading, just certain, and Clara felt something inside her crack because no one had ever said. Her leaving mattered before, not since her father was alive, and she told him he was too late, that she'd already decided, that the West was full of promises that rotted under the sun, that men like him always chose the land over people, always chose solitude over love. And Jacob didn't interrupt her, didn't defend himself, just waited until the whistle sounded again and then said, "I know I ain't much for words, and I know you got every reason not to trust a thing I say. But if you leave now, I'll regret it for the rest of my life. And I don't say that lightly." And she laughed bitterly. Because regret was cheap out here, because every grave on the hillside behind the town was built from it. And she reminded him how he'd kept his distance, how he'd watched her struggle to keep her father's boarding house alive after the funeral and never once offered help, how he'd chosen the silence of the range over, standing beside her when the bank threatened foreclosure, and Jacob nodded, slow, accepting, and said, "You're right, and that's on me. Because I thought if I stayed away I wouldn't get you tangled in a life that's hard and lonely and dangerous. But turns out staying away hurt you worse, and that honesty, raw, unpolished, unexcused, hit her harder than any pretty speech could have, because it was the truth." And she remembered all the small moments she'd pretended not to notice. The way he'd fixed the fence behind the boarding house at dawn so no one would see. The way groceries appeared on her porch when she couldn't afford them. The way he'd stood at the edge of town during her father's burial like he didn't deserve to be closer but couldn't bring himself to be farther away. And the conductor called, "All aboard," and Clara's hands shook, because the future she'd planned back east suddenly felt thin and colorless compared to the one standing in front of her, asking, not demanding, for a chance. And she told Jacob that chances were dangerous, that loving a cowboy meant loving uncertainty, dust, loss, and the constant fear that one day he wouldn't come back from the range. And Jacob stepped closer, close enough that she could see the scar along his jaw, the one he'd never talked about. And he said, "I won't promise you easy, and I won't promise you safe, but I will promise you honest. And I will promise you that if you stay, you won't ever have to face this world alone again." And the train hissed, steam clouding the platform like a living thing urging her forward. And Clara realized she was crying, silent tears slipping down her cheeks as she thought about how tired she was of running, of surviving instead of living, of choosing safety over meaning. And she asked him what he was really offering. And Jacob didn't hesitate, didn't dress it up. Just said, "A home if you want it, a partner, not a possession, a life we build together one day at a time." And something inside her settled, like a restless animal finally finding a place to lie down. And when the conductor shouted again, she looked past Jacob to the train, to the rows of faces that would never know her story, and then back to the man who already knew too much and still wanted her. And she made her choice, setting the suitcase down on the platform with a finality that echoed louder than the whistle ever could. And Jacob exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for years. And he didn't touch her, didn't claim her victory as his own. Just smiled, small, stunned, reverent. And as the train pulled away without her, Clara felt fear, yes, but also something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope, fierce and fragile and real. And in the weeks that followed, the town watched in quiet amazement as she moved into Jacob's ranch house, not as a kept woman but as an equal, bringing warmth and laughter into a place that had known only solitude. And they worked side by side through storms and drought and hard days, arguing, learning, choosing each other over and over again. And when trouble came, as it always did in the West, they faced it together, not as a cowboy and a woman he'd stopped from leaving, but as two people who had dared to believe that love was worth the risk. And years later, when trains still passed through town carrying people chasing safer lives, Clara would sometimes stand on the platform and watch the smoke fade into the horizon, her hand in Jacob's, and she would know, with absolute certainty, that the bravest thing she had ever done was stay. And if this story stirred something in you, if you believe in second chances, in love that asks instead of takes, in the courage it takes to stay when running feels easier, then don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because more powerful Western stories of love, sacrifice, and destiny are coming, and you won't want to miss a single one.